The Pulverize Druid is one of the coolest, hefty-feeling classes in Diablo 4, but how does it fare in the late game? Let's talk about it. Starting with the skills that kills on this one, the basic one that we go for is Wind Shear, and the rune that we're using is Fierce because this is going to give us run speed whenever we use this, and this is a wonderful resource generator. On the next part of the skill tree, obviously we max out Pulverize, and the one we're going with is Primal for the rune because that's going to give damage reduction for any enemies that we end up pulverizing. And then some of the passives, we have one in the Heart of the Wild so that we can get Wild Impulses because it's going to cost more resource, but to do more damage. And then for the other one, we only have one into Predatory Instinct, and then we have 3 into Iron Fur. This is just going to give us more damage reduction. On the next part of the skill tree, we have a couple of pretty important things here. Earthen Bulwark is a wonderful defensive, but it also, if you go with the Preserving rune, it gives us Fortify, which is a huge chunk of this build's damage. Following that, we have Blood Howl. This is to shapeshift us into a wolf form, which is going to come into play later, and then the rune that we have with that one is to just get us more spirit from the innate Blood Howl. The other passes in here, Ancestral Fortitude is going to give us more resistances, and then Vigilance is going to give us more damage reduction whenever we use Bulwark or Blood Howl. Now in this build, I actually skipped the companion part of the tree entirely, and we go all the way down to the Wrath skills. Now the main active ability that we have here is Trample because it's a wonderful gap closer. It's great for gathering up enemies, and then the rune that we use for it actually makes it really good for spirit generation as well. And then the passes that we use in this tree, we only have one into Mending so that we can get to Provocation, and Provocation is going to make our skills overpower every 16 seconds. So that's one of many ways that we generate overpower. I believe there's 3 with this build in total, if not more than that. So you're honestly overpowering so often. For the other passives on this tree, we only have 1 into Crushing so that we can go 3 into Stone Guard, and this is going to give us bonus damage whenever we have a good amount of Fortify on us. And then the other one that we're going to use is Safeguard, and this makes our critical strikes give us Fortification. Now on the ultimate part of the tree, what most build guides recommend is Petrify, but I don't use that. I like the Super Saiyan form of Grizzly Rage. And then one of the passes that we use here is kind of unique. It's a little different, but it has to do with one of the aspects that we use in the future. So we have 1 into Defiance, but then 3 into Circle of Life, which makes our nature magic skills heal us for 3% of our health. Now, one of the aspects that we'll talk about in just a minute actually makes our Pulverize an earth skill, aka a nature magic skill. Then the other 2 passives that we max out is 3 into Quick Shift and 3 into Heightened Senses. These are going to give us bonus damage and also damage reduction every time we shift. And for the key passive, we're going to go with Ursine Strength, and thanks to everybody in the comments on the last Druid video that I did, I learned how to actually say this skill. But this is going to increase our life anytime we're in Werebear form, which is always, and then we're also going to do more damage whenever we're healthy, which is always, because this build is tanky as fuck. And then for the Druid Spirit boons that we're using for this one, you bond with the Eagle one, and that's how you can choose 2 on 1 row. I actually got that question a couple of times on my last Druid video, which was surprising, but yeah, you bond with one of them so you can have 2 in that same row. But those are as follows. We have Wariness for the damage reduction from elites, Iron Feather for maximum life, and Avian Wrath for more critical strike damage. And then actually instead of Pack Leader, I use Energize because I like the energy regeneration from it, so I can use Pulverize even more because we're not using any companions with this build. And then finally we have Obsidian Slam, which is going to give us another opportunity to overpower our abilities. Now obviously the skill section, you can do whatever you want to do. This is just what I'm using to showcase this build. Now the main aspect on this build is Shockwave because it adds a ton of bonus damage, but it also gives you this ranged shockwave that comes out every time you Pulverize, and it's really sweet looking and great feeling. A couple of the other ones that we want to use for this build, Urson Horror makes your Pulverize an earth skill, and this is what we were talking about earlier for some of those passes that we used in the skill tree, but it also adds these tectonic spikes that kind of linger for a second every time you Pulverize. Another one is Aspect of Raw Might, which is going to make our Pulverize really strong and stun things after you hit X amount of enemies. And then Retaliation is going to give us a bunch of bonus damage based on our Fortify, which is why Fortify is so important to this build. So hopefully by now you kind of see how some of this stuff is starting to come together for it. Now some of the defensive aspects are pretty standard across the board for most builds. This one has a couple unique ones, but obviously you start with Disobedience for that bonus armor. Might is going to give us damage reduction every time we Wind Shear. And then another one is Mending Stone, which is unique to Druids, and that's going to increase the duration of our Earthen Bulwark. And I think it's by 6 seconds or something like that. So it almost literally doubles the time of Earthen Bulwark. Now there's obviously more aspects that you can use. These are just the main ones that I want to highlight and focus on for when you're building this class. As for the stats, Season 4 has kind of changed the way that stats work and has made it a lot more accessible to the general public and myself. But still, the couple of things that you want to stack with this Druid build is you absolutely want want crit stuff where it's either critical strike chance or critical strike damage. Attack speed is a really big one, and then spirit generation is also a big one because Pulverize is very hungry. As for the defensives, because you use Fortify pretty often, life is one of your most important defensive stats, and then armor and all resistances follow that. Now for the Paragon board on this build, I like to use max roll a lot for all of my Paragon planning or anything like that because honestly it's kind of daunting. But the starting board looks a lot like this. At the start you're going to use the shapeshifter glyph, and this is going to give us bonus damage and then bonus to all of our resistances. You'll notice resistances are actually pretty nice and easy to come by with the Druid. The first board that we're going to use is Ancestral Guidance, and the glyph that we're going to use is Outmatch, and this is going to also give us more damage and more resistances. The board north of that one is the Survival Instincts, and the glyph that we're going to use is Exploit, and this is going to give us bonus vulnerable damage and also give us the ability to make enemies vulnerable. To the left of this, we have the Earth and Devastation board, and the glyph that we're going to use here is Earth and Sky. And this one is going to give our Earth skills bonus critical strike damage, and our nature magic skills are going to do increased damage to crowd-controlled targets, but remember, our Pulverize counts as both of those now, and that also gives us all resistances. And then the final board is Inner Beast. And on the Inner Beast board, the glyph that we're going to go for is Dominate, arguably one of the most important glyphs in this entire build because it increases your overpower damage by an absolute fuckload. And funnily enough, whenever you do overpower an enemy, it's going to increase the damage that they take from you, so it's kind of a double hitter. So again, when it comes to the Paragon board, you can do whatever you want to do. This is just what I use to showcase this build. Now for some of the Endgame gear, the helm that I like to go for is actually Godslayer because it's really nice for clumping up enemies to hit with your Pulverized Shockwave. Wildheart boots are going to give you a stacking damage buff every time you shift in and out of form, so if you use Blood Howl and then shift back for Pulverize or anything like that, you're stacking an extra damage modifier. Tibalt's Pants are going to give us more damage and extra resources every time we become unstoppable, which is kind of often with this build. And then the Insatiable Fury unique is going to permanently make you that bear that you truly are, while also increasing all of our skill levels by I think 2 or 3. Now the playstyle on this one is pretty straightforward and easy to understand. You're basically the bear version of King Kong. Mainly you just focus on keeping Fortify up and then just keep pulverizing everything into the ground until they're cute little goo puddles. And whenever you're low on resources, you got a couple options. You can Howl, you can Trample, or you can just use Wind Shear, and that's going to give you bonus move speed anyway, so you do that. And then obviously you can utilize Bulwark defensively if you need to, but really it's just for keeping Fortify up at all times. Now objectively, this build has absolutely incredible AoE and it's extremely hard to kill. Like most builds, however, you can't have all three, and it's rather slow when it comes to bossing. I put this up on the pit clap meter and it pulverized a kind of slow 6 minutes and 29 seconds. And again, this is in its complete unoptimized form. And that doesn't mean it's not fun. In my opinion, this was actually a ton of fun to play. And I think the devs truly nailed that hefty feeling of playing a bear druid. I would say all in all, whenever I am leveling up a druid, I started Pulverize for the longest time. I have since then switched to Lightning Storm, but that doesn't mean this build isn't going to give a good rating. So I'm going to say it's a solid 8 out of 10 from me. Now that bodes my next question. What are you playing this season in Diablo 4? You'll have to let me know in the comments down below, and on your way down there, maybe like and subscribe because they're both free and they really help out the channel here. And if you want, you can go the extra mile. We do try to stream once in a while here on YouTube, and the best way to keep up to date on whatever I'm doing is join our Discord and pay attention to the announcements tab in there. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video, and if you're bored, YouTube is going to recommend this next one for you. Happy grinding, travelers, and we'll see you in Sanctuary.